I want to start this off with a story. I was in Winchester at the weekend, speaking at the Winchester Science Festival on sex and evolution. Yes, the talk will go up on YouTube soon. And whilst I was there, I thought I might as well stay and listen to some of the other talks. And one of the speakers was Jocelyn Burnell. She's famous for not having won the Nobel Prize for discovering pulsars. And that's about all I knew about her. And after her talk, she gave a Q&A. And in this Q&A, she talked about her life and kind of her progression through science and what got her there. And she spoke about when
they sent the boys to the science lab and the girls to the domestic science room.
Or that when she was an undergraduate,
that when a female entered the lecture theatre, every guy and whistled and stamped and catcalled. And that's okay if there's several women, but if you're on your own, you have to face that on your own every lecture.
And I was sitting in the audience. And yes, I was quite tired because it had been a long festival, but I was getting really quite emotional to hear her story because she'd been through so much adversity and yet she'd had the determination and the doggedness and the drive to say, sod them, I'm going to do it anyway. And so I asked her after the end of the talk, how did you have the confidence to keep going through what sounds like a pretty horrible experience? And so she said, I was in Cambridge when I didn't expect to be there. And have you heard of Impostor Syndrome? At which point, I'm in my head going, Jocelyn, you have no idea. Of course I know about Impostor Syndrome. I frickin' feel it all the time. And I'm thinking, hang on a sec, you are this amazing, inspirational woman. Like, she must be one of the most celebrated physicists of our, alive now. And she's talking about imposter syndrome? This is all going in my head. And out loud, I'm like, yes, I have heard of imposter syndrome. And I'm smiling. She starts smiling. And she said, because I didn't expect to be in Cambridge, I expected at any point someone would tap me on the shoulder and say, excuse me, you're not supposed to be here. Can you now leave? And because of that, she said, I worked as meticulously and as hard and as precisely as I could so that if they did throw me out, at least I would have made the most of my time there. And that's imposter syndrome. It's a term that came about in the 1970s, and it basically can be summarised as not thinking you're good enough despite having evidence clearly to the contrary. And you're not able to internalise your own successes. Instead, if you're successful, you think it's a fluke, it's down to luck, it's down to timing. And as the name suggests, a lot of people feel like a fraud or like an imposter, and that they're somehow convincing everyone around them that they're better than they are and lying to everyone, and that one day they'll be found out and kicked out. And I've really felt this over the last year as I started my PhD. And I didn't feel it when I started as an undergraduate at Oxford. I had the problem of realising that to do your best and to be the best were not the same thing. Once I got past the kind of perfectionist issues to some extent, I was fine throughout undergraduate. And then I started my PhD at the beginning of this year, and I suddenly felt out of my depth. I mean, I was several years younger than most of the people on my course because I'd gone straight from a bachelor's to the PhD and I hadn't done any master's courses in between, and everyone else on my course had done at least one, maybe two, some even three master's courses. As a behavioural ecologist who likes studying whole organisms, to be having lecture after lecture from people that are saying that, oh yes, systems biology is great because it studies all the levels of biology, all the way from the atom, all the way up to the tissue. And I'm thinking, I know nothing about biology really from the tissue down. I know everything from the organism to the population and landscape level. That's my bit, and I'm constantly I'm always on the back foot learning about this other section of biology. Not that I felt like an imposter, but just that I felt that I wasn't qualified enough to be there as much as the people around me were qualified to be there. And then I started these lab rotations, which means that basically I get to do a tiny project in 12 weeks, have to write it up at the end of 12 weeks, which means that because it's so focused into that tiny amount of time, there was very little time to sit down and do the reading at the beginning and kind of get a general overview for the field. So I didn't feel much ownership of my projects. I didn't feel that I was the one with the creative input into my own work, and then I was very much just going along with what my supervisors were suggesting. I constantly felt, and I suppose feel, that if I'm not coming up with my own ideas, then I'm just, I suppose, a dog's body doing the menial tasks that anyone can do. Why am I even studying this PhD in the first place? I obviously don't fit in. The people around me are much more passionate than me. They have the motivation to go out and do all this extra reading that I don't have time to do. And it even got to the extent where I couldn't face going into the office on some days, or that when I was in the office I could physically feel the adrenaline in my body. I could physically feel my heart pounding much faster than it ought to, like feeling lightheaded, my stomach was starting to do somersaults, and so obviously I took like the afternoon off and just wandered around the park and things were fine. But it was that thought of, oh my god, everyone else around me is better than me, I really don't belong here. Imposter syndrome is often talked about with respects to women. And it's said that more women than men are affected by it. Women are told by society that they're not allowed to boast about their own successes. They are not allowed to receive compliments well. And women within STEM subjects already feel like outsiders. But then I wondered, is it really a female thing more than it is a male thing? Is it just a science thing? Is it a graduate thing? And so I opened it up to Twitter. And I got an awful lot of responses. But I got it from graduates and professors alike. And there were some kind of common themes. And with science as well, you are at the edge of knowledge known to anyone, let alone to you. You are constantly pushing the boundaries of what is known. And when I was going through it, I've read so many articles on this topic and YouTube videos. And one of the articles I found really useful was called On the Importance of Stupidity in Scientific Research. All the links to everything I mentioned are down below. Talking about how, as a scientist, you've got to force yourself as an intelligent person to feel stupid, and by feeling stupid, that's the only way you can succeed. And a TED talk by Yuri Allen goes into a similar sort of thing, where him as a supervisor acknowledges that he needs to create a really supportive environment for his students when they're in that unknown area, because it can really drain your self-confidence. And it seems that this is a massive problem for productivity in science, and in other areas of course, but particularly in science. So why aren't more people talking about it? And that's what this video is. Let's start a discussion. And what can we do to combat it? I don't have the answers, but I got some themes from Twitter, and the number one thing that crops up again and again and again is to talk about it. So if there's anything I've learnt from this year, it's that it is really important to be able to show and feel vulnerability in any area of life. As horrible as that feels at the time, and I am particularly rubbish at admitting vulnerability, or at least I was, as horrible as it feels, it is the best step forward. And the more people that talk about it, the more you realise that it is this common phenomenon that everyone experiences. And I particularly feel it when people that I admire or respect, like Jocelyn Burnell, when they talk about how they felt imposter syndrome. And so I think it would be really important to change the culture in science so that supervisors and PIs talk about their vulnerabilities, as well as the graduate students talking to each other. So like I say, this isn't an educational, well-researched video about imposter syndrome. This is very much starting a discussion, trying to get people talking about it. Have you felt imposter syndrome? Do you think it's a male or a female thing, or a science thing, or a graduate thing? What tips do you have for getting over it? Is it something you can ever get away from? And let's start talking about it. I've put I've storified the tweets that I've received, or you can see them on my Twitter at Sally page. And this is the point where I normally say keep smiling, and do try to keep smiling, but do as well remember that it is okay to feel rubbish sometimes. Maybe that should be my new catchphrase.